American rare earth materials company. It will be to build out the nation's rare earth magnet supply chain and reduce U.S. dependency on China and other countries. Joining us now to discuss this is Nathan Worcester, national political reporter for the Epoch Times. Good afternoon, Nathan. What does the Pentagon becoming the largest shareholder in MP Materials signal about how the U.S. views rare earths currently?
Well, it signaled something to the market for sure. The share price has spiked 54%. And I think it's important to put this in context. Not only would they be the largest shareholder at 15%, but they have committed to purchasing, I believe, $400 million worth of stock. This is certainly an indication that there's a sense now, I think especially after the export controls from China, that it is necessary for the United States to get more serious about having a domestic supply chain for these rare earths that are used in defense and various other important applications.
Is Materials shareholder interest aligned with national security priorities?
Well, it's interesting to consider the big picture here with MP Materials. They have the largest, I believe, at one point it was the only place where rare earths were being extracted. And also they have a processing capability that was enabled in part by $35 million from the Pentagon under the Biden administration. So this recent stakeholder relationship that has been established, it is new, but it is not the first time the U.S. government has taken an interest in MP Materials. But Shenghe Holdings, or rather Shenghe has a relationship with the Chinese government and remains a stakeholder, remains a part owner, but a smaller owner of MP Materials. And I think that should illustrate, among other things, just how difficult it is to operate in the rare earth industry without any Chinese government or government-associated firms being involved.
How or does this move the needle in terms of reducing dependence on China?
Well, so the capacity that they're going to get up to is 10,000 metric tons per year starting by 2028. And that is dwarfed by the amount that is produced on the order of hundreds of thousands of metric tons per year by China. So does it move the needle in terms of the overall numbers? Perhaps to some extent. I think also, as I mentioned previously, those export controls from China, those are forcing the issue somewhat, as is the general Trump administration pivot to addressing some of these gaps that exist in relation to Chinese industrial capacity, mining, and much more. But it, I would say, also is something with clear symbolic importance. I wouldn't be surprised if over the long term we see the European Union or other Western nations considering similar strategies.
Okay, just to follow up on that, to what extent exactly do you think China's export restrictions on rare earth elements impacted U.S. actions?
Well, I think we can look at that happening, and that was at least briefly paused as part of the move that the Trump administration did to just put the brakes on tariffs briefly to carry out negotiations. But I think this is a very meaningful contribution to what we're now seeing play out. I think it's also interesting to consider that MP Materials is not necessarily the only company, and that mine that they have is not necessarily the only place in the United States where one could potentially extract rare earths. I think the notion over the long term of partnerships like this between the Department of Defense or other entities that can, in the case of the Department of Defense, guarantee a price floor, guarantee offtake for magnets over a decade, that could potentially, if we see this replicated elsewhere, make space for entrance to the market that would, under other circumstances, be more speculative or unprofitable.
How do the U.S.'s rare earth capabilities compare to China's right now, currently?
Well, so big picture, China continues to have a near monopoly, not a total monopoly on rare earths. The top line numbers of roughly 60%, 61% of overall mining, but then the processing, that higher value step, where I think we've seen not only is there a lot of commercial potential, but also you can then apply pressure. They control 92% of that. So the United States has a lot of ground to make up. I think it's fair to say that if you were to simply dismiss this as, well, it's only a matter of mining sites in China or something smaller than that, you would miss the bigger picture of the strategic advantages that they have up and down the value chain.
So how did we get to this point where the U.S. is basically reliant on China for rare earths?
Well, I think there were a variety of factors. You look at, for example, the saga of MP Materials. It's gone through a number of different hands. Uh, Among other things, there are tailings in mining facilities or at mines elsewhere in the country that, in large part because of existing statutes, but also lack of market demand, nobody is trying to make use of those rare earths. And then, of course, we've had the negotiations over Greenland, which have involved rare earth resources in that country. And I will note that I was told that in that case, without this kind of guarantee, as with any mining project there, it can be highly speculative. You can have something like 1 out of 1,000 projects at that early exploration stage will succeed. And so that means that unless you're willing to bear a lot of risk in some form, this attempt to find and commercialize rare earths or frankly other critical minerals, it can run into some real challenges.
Can the U.S. sort of replace China by sourcing from allies?
No, on rare earths, certainly not yet. As I mentioned previously, Shenghe remains a player in this particular company, remains a player in the sector as a whole, I think, in the West. On the other hand, there are minerals, there are sectors where China does not operate with quite the same level of dominance and control. And I think we're seeing moves on that. But, just to focus on another sector, for example, drones, there's a real concern with making sure that if not one company, then multiple companies can challenge some of the Chinese players in that sector.
Okay, Nathan, good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Heavy rain and flooding are back in central Texas. Rescues and evacuations are now underway just 10 days after catastrophic flooding killed at least